What's good, YouTube? It's your boy D-Rip. Hey, today we're gonna be reacting to wrestlers' gimmick changes, basically, right? First on come across channel, make sure you go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to your boy because I do a lot of wrestling content and y'all seem to like it, and I love wrestling. So, you know, I would say it's in my blood, but I'm not part of the bloodline. But hey man, hey man, hope y'all like this video. Go ahead and subscribe to me. I'm trying to hit 5K before the end of the year, and I won't be able to do it without you. So make sure I help your boy out. But without further ado, let's look at these gimmick changes.
In a prior video, we've talked about some of the times where gimmick
Cody!
changes went wrong. Those experiments that saw someone morph into an all-new character, only for things to end up falling flat on their
They be
face.
changing stuff too much.
That's not to say all attempts to freshen things up are bad, as in many cases,
Umaga.
these have worked to the betterment of the person involved. Yes, sometimes a new coat of paint is exactly what's needed, and that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. So join us then as we take a deep dive into the best examples of changing things up in Repackaged, Wrestling's Best Gimmick Changes.
You don't see.
And where better to start than with one of the most successful examples of refreshing things, as, while he had carved out a nice role for himself as a perennial mid-carder during the Attitude Era, it wouldn't be until Bradshaw morphed into JBL that he'd finally reached the main event scene. Unlike many others in this video though, the change up here didn't require John Layfield, the man behind the character, to pretend everything he'd been before hadn't happened. No, instead, he kept that as part of his history, with it all coming about when, after Farouk was kayfabe fired from WWE in 2004, Bradshaw would choose not to follow him out the door, quietly signaling to audiences watching that he was about to turn heel in the process. What they didn't expect, however, was for him to come out on the next week's episode of SmackDown having radically reinvented himself, with him now completely dropping the cowboy bar fighter-esque character and presenting himself as something closer to the real man, a financial analyst who had become a self-made millionaire through his manipulation of the stock market. And this would see him begin to portray more of a J.R. Ewing-style figure going forward then, as with his 10-gallon hat and his cabinet of heels in tow, JBL would quickly rise up the ranks of the blue brand. So high would he rise, in fact, that come June's Great American Bash pay-per-view, just a couple of months after the character had debuted, Layfield would defeat Eddie Guerrero to win the WWE title.
And then shortly after
that,
Cena,
he'd further solidify himself as the top heel on the show by holding on to the belt for the next 280 days, beating the likes of The Undertaker, Booker T, The Big Show, and Kurt Angle in the process. Of course, by the time he came up against John Cena at WrestleMania 21, however, things would change, as there, Big Match John would be able to end the heel champion's reign of terror, picking up the top prize for the first time himself, as he did. That said, due to his lengthy run prior to this, JBL was now a made man. And as it turned out, all this had happened at just the right time for him, as it's since been revealed that, had the new gimmick not worked, then WWE were getting ready to cut bait on Bradshaw. Yes, sometimes when your back's up against the wall, that's when you fight the hardest to succeed. And the very same thing could be said of our next entry, Kane. Of course, before he was the Big Red Machine, Glenn Jacobs had undergone a number of pretty terrible gimmicks, including but not limited to Unabomb, the Christmas Creature, and Dr. Isaac Yankem DDS. And after each of these predictably failed, the future mayor of Knox County, Tennessee would be saddled with an even worse one when, upon Kevin Nash and Scott Hall's exit from WWF in 1996, Vince McMahon would try to recast their Diesel and Razor Ramon characters with a couple of imposters. So, tasked with the role of playing the fake Diesel then, Jacobs would immediately struggle as fans rejected the whole thing in droves. And, just like Bradshaw years later, it's since been revealed that the failure of this was causing the boss to think about letting the future WWF champion go, with him feeling that if Jacobs didn't succeed with his next role, there was nothing else the company could do with him. Luckily then, that next role would prove to be one of the most popular and enduring characters in WWE history as, after months of teasing his debut throughout 1997, it would be at October's In Your House Bad Blood during the first ever Hell in a Cell match where the now former fake Diesel made his debut as Kane, the once...
this has to be like the greatest debut ever. Like, who had a better debut than Kane? Dude came out like this, ripped the cell door off, Tombstone The Undertaker. Who had a better debut than that? I'm not saying debut match. I'm saying just debut.
Thought dead brother
This
of
might be the best
Undertaker.
recreation though.
And
This might
making
be
a
the
quick
best one.
impact, Kane would rip the door off the cell with ease, then proceed to lay waste to the dead man, with him from there spending the weeks and months following demanding that his brother fight him one-on-one. After that, the two would finally meet in the ring at WrestleMania 14, with Kane following this up by becoming one of the most popular characters of the Attitude Era, and even a brief WWF champion upon beating Steve Austin at King of the Ring 1998. But it wouldn't end there for Glenn Jacobs, as, being able to mold the gimmick to whatever was needed of it at the time, he'd be able to keep Kane at the top of the card for the next 2 decades, all up until the point that he ventured into the world of politics in 2017. Yes, he remains a key figure in WWE history, something which can't be said for a man whose out-of-the-ring trash-talking had led him to pretty much being blackballed from the company, and that's Ryback. Of course, this shouldn't take away from the fact that
I think his name was Skip Layfield or Skip Sheffield. It was one of those. It was Skip something. And I remember he used to say, yep, yep, yep.
for a while there, Ryback was one of the most over figures on the WWE roster, with this being all the more impressive as, prior to that, he'd been floundering as Skip Sheffield.
Yep.
Yes, as a member of the Nexus, Skip Sheffield never really stood out. This despite the fact that with his bulging physique and natural charisma, it should have been easy for Ryan Reeves, the man behind the gimmick. Luckily then, he would get another chance to prove what he could do when, upon the crashing and burning of the Nexus in 2011, Skip would morph into Ryback, a Goldberg-esque unbeatable monster who made short work of everyone he came up against. And this would see him quickly get over with fans, as drawing the same comparisons themselves, they'd take to chanting the big guy's name every time he came to the ring. Even when his win streak came to an end upon falling to CM Punk at October 2012's Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, in fact, Ryback would continue to be a popular upper mid-card presence in the years that followed, with him at various points acting as both a singles and tag team wrestler, all while becoming a one-time Intercontinental Champion and even briefly getting the rub of becoming a Paul Heyman guy. That said, by 2016, Ryback would find himself out of a job when he was released from WWE. And as it happens, he wasn't the only popular act who was getting released at this point, as elsewhere, Damien Sandow was also finding himself on the chopping block. But Sandow certainly didn't deserve to be let go, because after spending some time on SmackDown as Idol Stevens, where along with KC James,
I didn't know
was the
about
teacher's
this.
pet of Michelle McCool.
I didn't know
After
about this at all.
He'd been able to completely reinvent himself as the heelish savior of the masses. How did he do this? Well, by acting like the most pretentious, stuck-up jackass imaginable. Someone who regularly looked down upon and sneered at each and every fan in attendance, all while he was finding early in-ring success by teaming with Cody Rhodes. So riding this wave of success, Sandow would eventually decide to go solo as, from there, he would win the 2013 Money in the Bank contract. Unfortunately for him, though, this would also mark the beginning of his fall from grace, as after failing in his cash-in attempt against John Cena in October of that year, he'd be demoted to a more mid-card comedy role. It was just as well then that Sandow was a talented enough performer to get this over too, because after becoming the stunt double to The Miz, Damien Mizdow, as he was then calling himself, would successfully reinvent himself all over again. Yes, it goes to show that if someone is talented enough, they can get just about any rebranding over, and that's a point which can also be applied to our next entry, someone who was on the roster around the same time as Sandow, and that's Fandango. Before this, though, when he was yet to become every wrestling fan's favorite ballroom dancer, Johnny Curtis would spend 7 years working in WWE's various developmental territories trying to find a niche for himself.
You're Byron Sexton.
Eventually, after all this time searching, the very thing he'd been looking for would come his way in 2013 when he was called up to the main roster and given the gimmick which would make him famous. That's right, while it may not have gotten over on day one, Fandango would become a bit of a viral hit for WWE, as after he scored a pinfall victory over Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 29, fans in attendance at Raw the next night would take to singing his theme song loudly throughout the event. And this would result in the song catching on so much that, over the course of that week, it moved from number 175 to number 11 on the UK iTunes charts. So realizing he had some mainstream attention on his hands, Vince McMahon would start pushing Fandango more, allowing fans the opportunity to sing and dance to his theme song whenever he came out. Unfortunately, though, this push never presented itself in the form of any more big wins for the ballroom dancer, as despite getting to take part in some notable matches, such as the 2013 Money in the Bank ladder match, he would usually fail to pick up the win.
Oh my gosh.
And this also wasn't helped by a number of injuries Johnny Curtis picked up during this period, something which probably gave the boss second thoughts about how high he wanted to place him on the card. Still, even if he wasn't hitting the main event scene, Fandango would continue to be an entertaining presence on WWE TV, particularly when he began teaming up with Tyler Breeze in 2016 to create Breezango, a duo that would go on to have a number of great matches and backstage segments across Raw, SmackDown, and even NXT in the years that followed. Side note, the fact that this pairing wasn't called Fa-Breeze still bothers us to this day. But then, when it comes to our next entry, there was certainly nothing to be bothered about as, after having undergone a fairly successful tag team run as one half of 3 Minute Warning, Umaga's reinvention to main event heel was handled about as well as anyone could have hoped for.
He's another one.
A lot of this was down to the talents of Edward Fatu, member of the famed Anoa'i family, and the man behind the gimmick, because when he was brought back to the company in 2005 following the aforementioned 3 Minute Warning run, Vince McMahon decided there was a lot more he could do with him as a main event performer. And this meant transforming into Umaga, the latest Samoan Island Savage gimmick in a long line of them throughout WWE history. But while by that point, the whole thing could have easily come across like a relic of the past, Edward was good enough in the role to make it work, with him quickly coming across like an unstoppable monster as he beat absolutely everybody in his path. And this wouldn't be a win streak built only on the backs of mid-card talent either. No, Umaga would also run through a number of main event talent at this point too, picking up victories over the likes of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Ric Flair, and John Cena. In fact, his matches with Cena would be among the best that Big Match John had put on during the mid-2000s, and would go a long way towards helping improve to fans.
I remember I believe it was at the Royal Rumble. I think it was at the Royal Rumble. They had a last man standing match. John Cena ended up wrapping a rope around his neck and, ended it. Hopefully
he belonged in the spot he was in. But this still wouldn't mark Umaga's high point on the WWE roster. No, it wouldn't be until WrestleMania 23 in April of 2007 that he would reach another level altogether, when he was handpicked as Vince McMahon's surrogate during the Battle of the Billionaires, eventually going up against Bobby Lashley on that show in what was probably the most high-profile moment of his career. And using the momentum of this then, he would remain a main event heel act for most of the rest of his run from there, with him continuing to be a thorn in the side of babyfaces like Batista and CM Punk, all the way up until the point that he was released from his contract in 2009 after violating the company's wellness policy. And sadly, these drug issues would end up getting the better of him as, later that very year, he'd be found dead of an overdose in his Houston home. But the thing about the Anoa'i family is that there will always be others who can carry on the memories of the fallen, and one of the most successful members of this family continues to do so to this day, with him being someone who first found his own fortunes changing when, a decade prior to this, he'd morphed from Fatu to Rikishi. Yes, while many fans remember him now as everyone's favorite dancing Samoan of the Attitude Era, prior to that, Fatu had filled a number of different roles on the WWF
he
roster.
Looked just like the Usos,
first of which was as part of a tag team.
I know that's his dad, but they look just like him. When Rikishi was younger, the Usos looked just like him. It's actually scary.
Samu in the early 90s. And this team, named the Head Shrinkers, would even see the future Rikishi become a tag team champion at one point.
Look.
That said, when Samu left the company in 1995, it was clear that the big man was going to need to find something new if he wanted to stand out as a single star.
Can't tell me that the Usos don't
look
like him.
He would try out a number of different roles, including Make a Difference Fatu and the Sultan. Unfortunately, though, none of these would find much success, and it wasn't until 1999, when he was rebranded as Rikishi, that he would finally hit the next level. That's right, with his happy-go-lucky attitude perfectly complementing his ass-kicking credentials in the ring, Rikishi became a quick hit with fans, even managing to stand out amongst the stacked main event roster that was the turn of the millennium WWF. And a big part of the reason for this was his partnership with both Grandmaster Sexay and Scotty 2 Hotty, as together they became known as Too Cool, a trio that would beat down their opponents in the ring, only to then follow things up with a dance party after the bout was over. And this attitude towards competition would serve the big man well, as by June of 2000, he'd have become the Intercontinental Champion, with this seemingly signifying that he'd be entering the world title scene sooner rather than later. Sadly though, when this eventually did happen a few months later, it turned out to be a bit of a monkey's paw situation because, rather than go after the title as a top babyface star, Rikishi would turn heel when it was revealed that he'd been the one to kayfabe run over Steve Austin the year prior. And with fans not wanting to boo the Samoan they'd come to know and love then, this pretty much killed his momentum stone dead in one swoop. Still, at least for a short while, the Rikishi character had been able to see Salofa Fatu rise to the top of the card, making it a successful rebranding, at least in the short term. Unfortunately though, while our next entry did find similar levels of reinvigoration after he dropped the Leaf Cassidy gimmick, unlike Rikishi, Al Snow would never quite reach the same heights. But then, that's not to say he didn't have a good career for himself, as after spending much of the mid-90s floundering in WWF as Leaf and other equally bad gimmicks, Alan Sarvin would jump over to Extreme Championship Wrestling, where he would reinvent himself as Al Snow, a man who, after apparently suffering a psychotic break, had taken to talking to a mannequin head. And this got so over with the Philadelphia audience that by 1998, Snow was brought back to the WWF, with Vince McMahon allowing him to continue on his new character from there as he became a mainstay of the hardcore division. In fact, over the course of his run, he'd become a hardcore champion 6 times, all while also winning the European title once and the tag team titles with his real-life friend Mick Foley. Of course, it wasn't all good for Al during the Attitude Era though, as he'd also have to deal with being involved in one of the worst feuds of the period when he and the Big Boss Man started a beef, one which saw the heel cook and feed his opponent's dog to him, and ultimately led to the best left forgotten Kennel from Hell match. This aside though, the Al Snow character would prove to be successful. So successful in fact, that it's still being used on the indie circuit to this day, giving it more longevity than most of his era. But when it comes to longevity inside of a WWE ring, there are few who have been able to go on the run that Nick Nemeth has. And this is all despite the fact that, before he became Dolph Ziggler, he'd have to spend an unfortunate...
He was part of the Spirit Squad. I forgot about Dolph in the Spirit Squad.
...period as Kerwin White's personal caddy. Yes, the Kerwin White character is still a controversial one to this day, given the sensitive racial territory it touched upon. And essentially acting as the muscle for Chavo Guerrero's latest incarnation here, the future show-off would have to work extra hard so as to get through the whole situation unscathed. But even after he'd managed to successfully do that,
I didn't know about this part though.
Quite over, as from there he'd spend a period as Nikki, 1/5 of the Spirit Squad, a team of male cheerleaders who usually found themselves being used as cannon fodder to the likes of DX. So with these two gimmicks already on his resume, you'd think Nemeth would struggle going ahead,
especially they should do a Spirit Squad reunite.
Have the truly awful name of Dolph Ziggler. That, however, would be underestimating his talent, because using his Kurt Hennig-like in-ring skills and looks to power through it, he'd end up making fans forget all about how bad the name was, as starting in 2008, he'd pretty quickly get over as a popular mid-card act. And this would see him becoming a multiple-time Intercontinental and United States champion over the course of his run, all while he was simultaneously at one point getting to form one of the better heel stables of his era with Big E and AJ Lee. Of course, his real breakout into the next level wouldn't come until he won the Money in the Bank contract during the titular 2012
I was happy for Dolph, I remember this.
With him from there going on to hold that very contract until the following year. And the reason for this was that he was saving it for the night after WrestleMania 29 where, in one of the biggest pops of the modern era, he'd come out to cash in on Alberto Del Rio and win the World Heavyweight title. Yes, it looked like a superstar had just been born in front of fans' eyes, but unfortunately, Dolph's push would be stalled following this when a concussion he picked up soon after forced the company to change directions and take the belt off.
It's so sad because it seems like people work so hard, but when they finally get that championship, they get hurt. It happens to so many people, and it sucks. because they finally win that championship that they've been fighting and working hard for, and then they get hurt every single time, and then WWE just doesn't give him another chance.
Off of him. And while he would never fully reach the same level again after that, he would continue to be a popular mid-card presence in the company.
Give Dolph another chance,
bro. To put on a good match, whether he was facing someone with the technical skills of Seth Rollins or the more character-based style of The Miz. In fact, even to this day, he's still riding high as a member of the roster, with him most recently having jumped down to NXT to help put over future star Braun Breaker. But he's not the only popular figure of the 2000s and 2010s who has had a lengthy run with the gimmick that made it famous, because when it comes to John Morrison, rather than do it all in
Johnny
WWE,
Nitro.
He's visited just about every promotion under the sun over the years. Before he was doing
and his name like Johnny Elite now?
Johnny Nitro, one half of M&M, a popular early 2000s SmackDown trio, which also included Joey Mercury and Molina. Clearly being the star performer of the act, however, it wasn't long before Nitro, who had around this time been rebranded as John Morrison, a reference to his physical resemblance to Doors frontman Jim Morrison, would branch out on his own with intentions of conquering the singles division. So wasting no time then, he would immediately enter into the Intercontinental title picture over on Raw, quickly winning this, all before snagging his first world title upon jumping over to ECW for a while. And not content with just achieving this, after that, Morrison would form a memorable partnership with The Miz for a while too, one which saw both men play off of each other perfectly as a douchebag heel duo. But despite all the success he was having during his first run with WWE, that would only be the beginning of his story as it happened, because after leaving in 2011, Morrison would take his parkour-style athletics all around the world, proving that whether it was in Lucha Underground, AAA, Impact, or more recently AEW, he belonged on the top of the card. And in the end, this is the best indicator that his repackage was successful, as had he still been Johnny Nitro, it seems less likely he would have found the same level of success. But then the same could probably be said about everyone in this video, of course, because when it comes down to it, they each represent some of the best examples of gimmick changes in wrestling history. And in the end, that just ultimately goes to prove that sometimes change is good. Well guys, what did you think of the video?
I'm glad they got rid of that Seth Rollins Messiah stuff, man. I'm glad they got rid of that stuff. But hey, y'all like this video, make sure y'all go ahead and click that thumbs up for me. Let me know that y'all like this kind of content. I will continue to bring it. Let me know your thoughts, man. If there was anybody else that you could think of that had a major gimmick change, Stone Cold, The Rock. Can't really think of anybody else right now. But yeah, man, go ahead and like this video for your boy, man. Shows me that y'all like this kind of content. I have a lot of wrestling content. Y'all should check it out. But hey, man, like the video, subscribe if you're new. It's your boy D-Rib, and I'm out.